and welcome back to Reverse Shot. This is a show where we take a look at the press, its foibles, and of course, the things that we do well in the press. And this week we have a fascinating conversation. I want you to join us. You want to know why Donald Trump is popular in rural areas? Well, correlation isn't causation, but in 45% of the counties in this country, you do not have a local news source. And coincidentally, in those counties where there is no local news source, Donald Trump won 90% of those counties and by an overwhelming margin. The need for information has never been greater. The product has never been less. And to talk to us about that is a guy who worked with the Washington Post for many years. His name is Paul Farhi, and he worked with the Medill School of Journalism recently and has come out with an article about it. And we're going to spend some time talking to him about it, so pay attention. This week on Reverse Shot. Hi, and welcome back to Reverse Shot. With me today is Paul Farhi. Those of you who love the Washington Post and have read it for years, Paul was a media reporter for the Washington Post and has penned an excellent article that we've got to talk about, and that I brought him here to talk about today. That was in, well, let's see, where was it? It was in Northwest Medill's Local News Initiative is where I read it, the State of Local News. And it starts out, here's the headline. In news deserts, Trump won in a landslide. Donald Trump won the 2024 election with one of the smallest popular vote margins in U.S. history. But in news deserts, counties lacking a professional source of local news, it was an avalanche. Trump won 91% of these counties over his Democratic rival, Kamala Harris. And that's according to analysis of voting data by Medill University's Medill Journalism School's State of Local News Project. And Paul, you crafted that with someone else. What was the? I mean, I don't want people to get the mistake, and you mentioned it in the news in this article. You don't want to get the mistake that one caused the other. It's not post hoc ergo propter.
No, that's correlation, definitely.
Yeah. Correlation is not causation. But tell us what exactly. What exactly this means. What does it mean? First of all, 45% of the counties in the United States don't have any local source of news. And let's start with that. That's the problem, is it not?
Yes, and it's a growing problem. It's been a problem for several years, decades maybe, and it's increasing that many of these counties lost their last newspaper, which is a weekly paper. They don't have a radio station. They don't have a TV station. They get news through, I don't know, cable television maybe. You can watch CNN or Fox News, certainly. But you're not going to find out about what the mayor's doing. You're not going to find out about what is really happening in all of the local institutions because there's no one really to cover those things. And really what that ultimately does is keep people dependent on partisan sources of information. In other words, Facebook, there's no attempt at neutrality. It's somebody telling you something that they've decided is the case. So it's a long-running problem, and it shows no signs of slowing down at all.
Yeah, I mean the thing, and I'm shameless plug for my book, but in Free the Press, I pointed this out, and what you find, and what I found, and thank you for writing the article again, because it's a lot of what some of us have been saying for a while. But when you take a look at local media versus national media, local media, you may disagree on who the president is, you may disagree on policies, but everybody wants paved roads, clean streets, want to be able to make sure that your kids can go to school, you got a hospital to go to, and all of that is covered by local news, covering things like the city council, county council, Boy Scout meetings. People still love to see pictures of their kids playing football and cut them out and hang them on their refrigerator. None of that is happening anymore, and it's been a deconstruction of the local press, which, by the way, I find, and disagree anywhere you want in this, but local press is often the root of what becomes national stories. You first find out about serious stories at a local level, and then people connect the dots.
Yeah, and I think local is not quite what we're talking about here, as you just described it. It's news that you might actually know
Use.
about and use and affect you and be about your neighbors and be about you specifically. Obviously, the national news affects you. If the president declares war on somebody, your kids might get drafted or you might get drafted. But the more direct thing is what you're describing. How is the mayor, doing? How's the local budget? What are my taxes going to be? How are the cops performing their jobs?
Why isn't
Um,
this street paved?
why isn't my street paved? Exactly. And, before news deserts, there were people around to tell you that stuff. Now, they weren't perfect, of course. And, they had a kind of institutional loyalty in a lot of ways. But the point is there was a chance you were going to be able to find out about those things. Now, you might find out about them, but it's coming from who and what axe are they grinding? Reporters, you can say, let's say they have agendas, but it's nothing like the partisanship you see on social media.
Right. Well, that's yeah, and I want to speak to that a little bit, but the backbone of journalism, I've been told, is local reporting. Local
Mhm.
journalism is the backbone, and I have found that to be the case time and time again. And you may say that we have an agenda, but the other thing I always remember is working, and actually, I ran a couple of community newspapers for years. People would come to me and go, "This is what I think." I'd have young reporters. "This is what I think." I go, "I don't care what you think. I barely care what I think. What do you know?"
That's right. That's the essence of reporting.
Yeah.
And, it, as you know from a lifetime of reporting, it takes time, it takes money, it takes, a bit of background to be able to do reporting. If I'm just going to, tell what I heard from my neighbor over the back fence, that's not really reporting, that's gossiping. And I think one of the things we've lost psychologically in this country more and more as this rolls on is people can't tell the difference. They can't tell the difference between a news story, an editorial, or just somebody posting an opinion somewhere. They're not the same things. They have commonalities, but they're not the same things. But we get less and less informed and more partisan, is what it comes down to.
Yeah. What do you think the solution is to that? Before we go into the causes of what got us here, what do you think the solution is to where we are now?
Well, let's talk about the cause, and then maybe you
Okay.
get to the solution. The cause is we've changed from, legacy media to the internet, and Facebook and Google get a lot of advertising that doesn't go to local news sources. And so once that drains away, and you also have no classified ads, and you also lose the car dealers and all the businesses that once supported your local media, you don't have a media infrastructure anymore. So that's what's happened in the internet age. It's
So the
cheaper.
cause is money.
The cause is entirely money.
Is that a cause or is that a symptom? Because it seems to me that decisions that, and I've fought these fights in state and local government and the federal government. So I am tainted by that. But it seems to me that the cause for that money is a symptom of it, but the cause is the government because the government has pulled. We don't get support for local media like we used to. They stopped. They get rid of anti-SLAPP legislation so that large companies can sue small newspapers. They get rid of the local advertising. They fought in Maryland. We fought for years to keep the advertising in the public notice ads and those type of ads in newspapers and on television. Now I know some of it is also ignorance. When the internet came in, newspapers, television stations, radio stations didn't know how to react, and our reaction time was so slow that it built up, basically opinion makers instead of news makers. I get
Yep.
that. But I think the government, to me, I always look back at some of the things that started with the Reagan administration nationally, the consolidation of the media, but locally in state and local governments, it's the pulling of those ads and the support of local news that caused some of this.
You're right on the margins, but only on the margins. That
Okay.
local newspapers were supported by local people, the department store, the car dealer,
Right.
the shoe store, anybody who wanted to reach people in the community. When that goes, when, let's say, the shoe store no longer has customers because people are going to Amazon, um, that's going to affect your ability to operate, and that's exactly what happened to local news. The dollars went elsewhere, the people went elsewhere, and the news organizations went,
Belly
splat
up.
on the wall, belly up.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's where we didn't react. I think that's speaking to that point. I mean, I'm not, disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that I think that was our fault. That was we did not react well enough.
There's a limited amount of things you can do. This is an economic wave. If you're standing in the ocean and a giant wave comes over you, there's not a lot you can do other than get out of the way of the wave. But that's not really an option when your job or the financial support of your operation is the advertising from the local community. When that goes away, it's like the wave coming in the ocean. It's
So, is there any way to
impossible.
get it back?
Well, here's where we talk about the government, and you cite the government as a cause. I'll just say not the cause, but a cause. Some people have suggested that the government could be or hold the solution, and there's a whole bunch of legislative fixes or tax breaks or means by which local governments can pass legislation that supports local news. And I'll just give you one example. This has been tried in a few states. I don't know how effective it's been, but you hire a reporter, you're a news organization, you hire a reporter, you get a tax credit for that. Well, that's not going to keep you in business solely, but it's going to help. And that's one idea. Australia tried a very radical one, which is news publishers get to negotiate annual fees from Facebook and Google. Not popular with Facebook or Google, but the government in Australia and Canada passed this law saying because you have and you use the information that is produced by local news organizations, you owe them something for that. When a link goes up on Facebook to the story in the local newspaper, that benefits Facebook. When Google produces links, it benefits Google. So this Australian law is seen as a way to help support the beleaguered media. Now, again, it's not the only thing, but I think in the first year, which was 2021, it generated something like 150 million, Australian dollars for publishers that entered into these negotiations. So, it's one way, and but the irony here is, you know, news organizations wanted no association with the government except to cover them as a public service and as part of their business. Now they want the government to come save the news, and it's a historic change that's quite a bit different than the past.
Well, I think that speaks to our own hypocrisy because we were always. I mean, look, there were a time. If you go back, there was a time when a lot of the rags, and I use that term, back in the Jackson era, and there each political party had their own rag, had their own,
That's right.
newspaper. And then during the so-called golden age of journalism, we separated from and saw ourselves as being more of an arbiter and more of an objective purveyor of news. But we also had to have advertisers, and
Right.
so
But those things are related. And that's an
yes,
interesting point. And just want to stop you there. The reason publishers did that is because it maximized their audience.
yes,
I'm a Republican. I don't want to read that, left wing paper. Or I'm, a liberal Democrat. I don't want to read that right wing paper. Publishers said, okay, we'll do objective news and we'll maximize the audience. And advertisers liked it too because they could reach a whole lot of readers at once. And that's really what drove
yes, yeah.
the nonpartisanship of the
Well,
news media.
that and it opened up the possibility for doing stuff other than politics, like sports and entertainment and features and all the stuff that we
Sure.
came to enjoy, and built an entire cottage industry on that. But it seems to me that now more than ever, and I want to go back to something else that was written in the article because it's to what we're speaking. It says Trump's dominance of news deserts doesn't imply a cause and effect. We mentioned that. People didn't necessarily vote for Trump because they lack local news. Instead, a simpler, more obvious correlation may be at work. And this is important. News deserts are concentrated in counties that tend to be rural and have populations that are less educated and poorer than the national average. Exactly the kind of places that went strongly for Trump in 2024 and 2020. And that it actually, they are victims of that ignorance and not having a newspaper or a radio station or any source of news in their area. So Donald Trump is a symptom, not a cause.
Well, I would say that they're poor, is what it comes down to. They don't have the underlying support of a business infrastructure, of the ads, again, that could make for viable a news organization. Bethesda, Maryland, is going to be the last place that ends up being a news desert because there are
It is, though.
there's a functioning business operation, there. You go to a lot of places. One place I went to over the summer for another story for Medill was Cairo, Illinois, and that's a news desert, and there's a good reason for it. The whole infrastructure, business infrastructure, is really on its back heels. It's really in bad shape. So the support for a local news organization, TV, radio, print, whatever, is what's lacking in those places.
Well, you mentioned Montgomery County, you mentioned Bethesda. The Bethesda beat is there. But when I first moved to Montgomery County, the Washington Post had two reporters. There was the Gazettes. There were 6 or 7 of those there. The Montgomery County Sentinel. There was which I ran, the Journal, which was a daily. There was a radio station, 2 of them, I think, that did news. Now the only thing left is the Bethesda Beat, and that grew up in the demise and the collapse of the daily that was there, the Journal, the 2 weeklies, several weeklies, and the lack of the Washington Post covering it anymore.
That's
Turk
right.
was the last guy that I remember being there, and he's gone. So it's not just in the poorer counties, but to your point, I guess there is still some coverage in Montgomery County. You still have the Bethesda Beat. At least you got one, but
Yeah.
it's
But you also have WTOP that if something happens in Bethesda, they'll get on the scene. The Washington Post will get on the scene. I mean, there are a lot of places where there won't be anybody to come and cover
well, that's true.
the news. But yes, you are entirely correct. The Washington Post, less than a year after Jeff Bezos bought the Post in 2013, ended the Gazette newspapers, which circulated in Montgomery County and PG County,
Yep.
and at one point had gone all around the Beltway, and they were very good. They did a lot of
Yes.
good local reporting, and Jeff Bezos tried to sell them. Here's the news desert phenomenon. Tried to sell them, and people said, we don't think we can operate a profitable news organization, even in relatively wealthy Montgomery County. So even economic vitality isn't entirely the basis for supporting a news operation.
And to your point, while you may have, and I think this points out something that's pretty important to recognize, is that while you could, even in Montgomery County, donate or give some of your reporters to a cause, that some of your resources could be donated to or driven to a spot news story or something like that. But the point that I remember is there were county council meetings in Montgomery County. There'd be 6
Right.
reporters there. Today, there's none. You can view
Right.
it online, but there's not the day-to-day coverage. And without that, corruption is much easier to obtain and see, or happen, more likely to happen than if you had.
It's a great time for corruption. And in fact, there have been studies about news deserts that corruption tends to be higher. However you measure corruption, taxes end up being higher. Voting turnout tends to be lower. There are a lot of knock-on effects here that undermine the civic nature of a place once you lose any kind of news coverage in that place. And it's all kind of logical. No one's going to the city council meeting. No one can discover the fact that somebody's been, embezzling a few million tax dollars. Um, and that's how news gets done is you do the shoe leather and you find out something that might end up being a big story. Let me tell you, you work for the Sentinel. The guy who got his start as a news reporter was a fellow named Bob Woodward, and he worked for the Sentinel too.
Yeah.
And he, when he was at the Sentinel, he was young Bob Woodward doing investigative work that was really, really great. Some months later, he went on and stumbled across a story called Watergate,
Yeah.
and so
He
so
had just left the Sentinel, as a matter
he
of
had left the Sentinel. That's right.
fact.
But which goes to another thing, which is maybe inside baseball, but it's important inside baseball, which is these local news organizations, small though they may be, are the farm team, the feeder
Yes.
system for
Yes.
the Washington Post, NBC, CNN, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, you get your
You
start
cut your eye
someplace.
teeth at those places.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's it. Exactly. You learn how to be a reporter, is what it comes down to.
Well, yeah, and then there are that I say often because I've seen reporters in the White House, fresh off the choo-choo, fresh out of college, have
Right.
no clue how to work a beat, and they're so enamored of being at I'm at the White House, and I'm going,
Sure.
you're not doing your job, pal.
Yeah.
They don't know
Go go
how.
look at go look at those old pictures of presidential press conferences. I don't know, Truman or Eisenhower. It's a bunch of older white men
Yeah,
is what it really comes down to. And that's because
and
there
women.
was
There were some women there.
very few, very
Very.
few. But the point is there was racism and sexism, but there was also the expectation that you, as a reporter, had been seasoned, experienced, knew your way around a newsroom, and could actually report on the biggest beat there was. Now, anybody can report on the biggest beat there was. I don't know that they can, of course, but are
Because
they
it's
good at it?
diminished.
Yeah.
Well, I think I may have told you this story, but it bears repeating just because I find it funny. But my very first day in the White House, I met Helen Thomas, and Helen knew my family because my great uncle had helped her family immigrate to the United States.
Hmm.
She's Lebanese, so she offered to take me to her house and make me a great Lebanese dinner, which she did, and it was great. But she walked me in and introduced me to Sam Donaldson. And she introduced me to everyone there. And Sam said, first thing he ever said to me was, Brian, I want you to take a look at that first row in the briefing room. There's more than 200 years of experience there, and listen to them. And then he said, and by the way, Helen has 195 of it. And, and Helen
That's a
said,
great story.
and Helen said something smart back to him, and he says, "Hey, Helen, it's okay to have an unexpressed thought." And she said, "Sam, when it comes to you, I have a lot of unexpressed thoughts." And
That's great.
I never knew that day was golden for me because of that moment. But you take a look at and he wasn't wrong. Each one of those people had about 30 years of experience sitting in those seats. That is not the case now. You maybe have half of that if you're lucky. I counted one day, and if I was right, I think there was maybe 50 years total of experience among those first 7 seats. And that to me is we've lost institutional knowledge.
Yeah, when you mention Sam Donaldson and Helen Thomas, you're kind of, going to the classics here. Would be like, what Babe Ruth said to Lou Gehrig. I mean, that is the equivalent journalistically of what we're
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they were my mentors when I was 24. I didn't know shit. I kept my mouth shut and I listened because he said, keep your mouth shut and listen. And today I remember one time, Paul, in the briefing room. This was during the first Trump administration. There was a young reporter I saw crying outside of the briefing room after the briefing was over, and I said, "Why are you crying?" And the reporter looked at me and said, I didn't get a question. And if I don't get a question, I've got to be seen, I'll get fired. And
Yeah.
I'm going, wow, that's really not how we do the job. But
Yeah.
Mike McCurry said the biggest mistake he ever made was putting those briefings on television. And I have to
Yeah.
agree with him. It became
Changed
viral.
it
Yeah.
changed everything. But the larger point here is there is no shortage of people covering the White House.
Yeah.
The White House said last week or the week before that they had opened up applications to credentials, and they got 11,000 people to apply. Now, those all aren't journalists, but it tells you there are a lot of people who'd love to cover the White House. How many people want to cover, the city schools or,
Or a
the
PTA
city
meeting.
government?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not glamorous, it's hard. And, um, back in my day, and actually even worse to this day, you didn't get paid very much. And so
Still don't.
it's still don't. And, your best hope is that you can advance through the system and get to a place where you can earn a livable wage. But that's a different thing of all. I don't
So
know. I spoke to a class last week, and the question was, what would you advise young journalists who want to be in the profession? And I said, I don't really know other than the way I did it, but the way I did it wasn't, it doesn't exist anymore. So it's not really
yeah.
great advice. Go start at a little paper. Oh, yeah. What little paper would you recommend I work at? They're all gone or they're going. And, I'd also like to pay my rent. And these kind of jobs are fewer and fewer.
You make an excellent point. I remember when I got out of college, they said you had to have 5 years of experience to go anywhere. Today, they'll hire you out of college, and after 5 years, probably boot you because you will need more money to pay your rent, and so they'd rather have someone cheaper in there. That
That's right.
I think a lot of that goes to the consolidation of the media that the government helped spawn, but it's the greed of six companies owning and operating 95% of what you see, read, or hear. There is no incentive. It's all, the money is the only incentive. It seems not.
That stat is suspect. Six
I
companies
think that is.
don't
Yeah,
don't own 95%.
yeah. I think that's a suspect. It's a nice. You're right. It's a nice talking point, but it. Well, I remember when I first got into this business, the stat they tossed around was 80% of what you see, read, or hear is owned by about 2 dozen companies, and then that kind of winnowed its way down. And I think you have to define what it is that you're talking about. Is it national news, or is it local news, or is it state news? Because
Yeah.
95% of what you see, read, or hear definitely isn't has nothing to do with your local or even state regional news.
I mean, these days, a lot of what you see, read, and hear comes from your next door neighbor. It comes via Facebook. I don't know that Facebook really cares what your neighbor says
Yeah,
and posts on Facebook, but a lot of what you see, read, and hear is coming from
it's not.
not terribly reliable people.
Well, here's all right. So here's we were gonna. I want to end talking about solutions, and one thing that I always the one thing that I still firmly believe, and this is my old school. You had asked me one time about activism. Do you consider yourself? And I don't consider myself an activist except for the right to do my job. That's, I just want to be able to do my job. And it seems to me that the way we do our job and the way to separate anyone can commit an act of journalism. And when I was in school, they said journalists were merely out of work reporters. It was just a fancy way of saying you were unemployed. But there was one thing that I carry with me, and I'd love your opinion on it. It's I think the coin of the realm. You talk about your next door neighbors. You talk about people telling you stuff, and it's gossip. Now I don't know how. I think the challenge is to get this across all platforms, whether it's on air, it's in a podcast, it's radio, it's the printed word. I think you have to be all of them, but I think the coin of the realm still remains vetted factual information.
Sure.
And
That's reporting.
yeah,
If your mother says she loves you, check it out is the old line.
you had the
Um,
same prof I had in college, it sounds like.
yeah, of course. I mean, it was, that's the way reporting is supposed to work. It's not just stenography where someone says something and you serve it up right away. You try to add context, you try to add facts, historical and current. Um, to give a context for what someone is saying and what the news is. Listen, a plane crashes. We cover the plane crash, but we don't just say a plane crash. There's more to it than that. There's an investigation. Anyway, there's a lot of steps involved in getting a full understanding of any event,
Yeah,
and that's called reporting.
we don't jump in and go it was a DEI hire that caused the plane crash. It's
Well, now you're getting, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Not a great source there, but
No, no.
yes,
But but all right, so my solution, and I love your thoughts on it, is that I think that people have more in common than they have differences. And vetted factual information being the coin of the realm, the future that I see for journalism is a platform, a website that coincident maybe it publishes itself once a week because people still love to read. There are a few people that actually like the tactile part of reading. So maybe you publish that, but you're also, because anybody with a cell phone can be live. You're not just a television station, but you are a website that is also a television station, that is a
that's right.
streamer, that is a blogger, that has opinions, but has at least there are, and I'm digressing, but there are newspapers today that don't have copy editors. They just go straight to the, I know a few of them, and it's shocking. But have at least have a couple of copy editors who are going, all right, that's spelled wrong. Where'd you get that fax? Those
Yeah,
facts. That's not what actually happened. At least someone to look over your copy before you post it. To hell with being first. The guy with a cell phone is going to be first.
for
Be the
sure.
one that can be depended on to be accurate. And you may not get a 20% return on your investment, but this goes back to the guy that I took lessons from, and and he owned the Courier Journal and Louisville Times, Barry Bingham Sr. He said, I never worried about being, the first. I just always wanted to be the most accurate and have the most information. And when I walked into that place to work, I remembered over the elevators, he had printed from his Worth Bingham, his dad, who had started the papers. I have always thought of these newspapers as a public trust and have
Mm.
endeavored to treat them that way. And man, that gave you that. I mean, it still gives me goosebumps.
Yeah,
But
I think it's a great idea. It's an idea that's fading out as the media declines. Let me just say one thing. There's all this rah-rah about how um, the mainstream media is dead. It's certainly not dead if you look at the numbers of people who watch, the evening news, who get, visit a website from a mainstream news organization. There's still a lot of people who care about that kind of information. But we have been on a, let's say, 20-year campaign by people to tear down the credibility of the media. It's a political strategy. It's a populist strategy. It's a lot of things. So people have been fed over and over again that the media is your enemy, and there are a lot of people who mistrust the mainstream media because they've been told to mistrust the mainstream media, and occasionally there's good reason to mistrust the mainstream media. But this gradual decimation of the media is going to leave us with a world where nobody really knows anything for sure, for the simple reason that there's no one out gathering those facts. I often post stuff, a link to the Washington Post or New York Times or whatever, because I trust them, first of all. But then people come back at me and say, hey, that's paywalled. I can't read the story. And he said, that's right. You need a subscription. That's how the media is supported. I mean, that's the way it was always supported, or in part. And people don't understand that
yeah,
news actually, it doesn't appear like the water out of your faucet. So,
I, I laugh because I've heard that so many times,
of
and
course.
my reaction is, well, they got to pay the rent too. Let's.
Right. Do you work for free? Do you, go to work and expect not to be paid? Of course you don't. So,
Well, so what do you think the solution is? And by the way, what you're talking about, about is what we grew up being. We called it shooting the messenger, right? And
yeah.
it's just because there have been more shots fired lately, but they're still doing the same thing because politicians don't want us in their business, and that
Oh,
is
of course.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
anyway,
it's a self-serving notion. Please get out of my way and let me do the lying, corrupt thing that I'm doing, and don't call me on it.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a great strategy, but that's not what the press is supposed to be about. Of course, we're supposed to call balls and strikes and say when someone's lying, for instance. Solution. I know what's out there. I don't know if they will actually solve the problem, but these are attempts to address the problem. We talked a little bit about government handouts, if you will, government legislation to prop up the crumbling financial foundation of the news media. There's a lot of effort going on right now to have charities, foundations support local news. MacArthur Foundation last year, or maybe 2023, announced a $500 million initiative that would roll up a bunch of charities that would hand out grants up to $500 million over 5 years to support news and initiatives. Like if Bethesda, Maryland needed a website to cover Bethesda, Maryland, as an example, they'd bankroll some of that, and so it's charity basically to get the news going. The thought is 5 years, maybe you'll get a going business over 5 years and you won't need charity, you'll be self supporting. So that sounds great. $500 million, that's wonderful. Then you realize how much it actually costs to stand up and sustain a news organization. It costs $500 million
right.
dollars in a lot of cases. So it doesn't go very far to
No, the barriers to
maintain.
entry are still there. The
Yeah,
barriers to entry into this market are still, and as they've always been. And the biggest problem is not, look, it's not putting up a website. It's not printing of the newspaper. It's not getting an advert, because advertising executives pay for themselves because they bring in the
yep,
ads. And by the way, one of my biggest complaints is they go from being ad managers to being, publishers of newspapers and not having a damn idea what the hell it is that we do on our end of the thing. But the biggest barrier to entry are reporters, the resources, the human
sure.
resources that you need to cover the news. And in the age of AI and computer generated graphics and Facebook and everything, just going online, that's we will invest in that, but not in people. And we're in the people
Right.
business, man. We're not
Yeah.
we're not in the AI business. But
You know,
that
you,
I don't think we've come to grips with either.
one of the great things about the Post under Jeff Bezos was we added a whole lot of positions that didn't exist. So you're talking about reporters. Well, the conventional thing is, well, you need reporters, you need editors, you need photographers. There's a whole lot more you need too. You need social media
Right.
people. You need producers for video. You need a whole lot of jobs that didn't exist before the internet came around, and it costs money to do that. Like I said, people like to get paid for their work.
Yeah, well, yeah, we all at the end of the day want to be able to pay the bills. So let's see.
Sure,
It's about the money.
it
uh,
ain't free.
no, but I can't tell you again. You make me laugh. How many people get on and go, "What? You mean you've got a paywall? I want that for free. What the hell's wrong with you?"
Yeah, because we've trained people to expect it to be for free. This might be where the media missed the boat when the World Wide Web came around in the mid '90s. People said, "Let's make it all free. People will access it. We'll build a big audience, and we'll sell advertising against that audience." Well, I mean, that's great until you realize that you're not going to get enough advertising to support the giveaway of the information. Free is not a great business model in most cases. And so this is where the subscription model came in 10, 15 years ago. Um, and, as it turns out, not that many people want to subscribe. I mean, the Washington Post has about 2 million subscribers. It's, relatively speaking, one of the biggest in the news business. The New York Times is the biggest. It has about 11 million subscribers. It's doing really well. And then who's number three? Who's number four? I mean, the list gets shorter and shorter after that. And so, there's subscription fatigue, and there's, I can get it for free somewhere else. It's not a great substitute. The Washington Post is premium news, but I don't want to pay for it. So I'll take the freebie option somewhere
Yeah.
else.
Even though Bezos bent his knee to Trump's, they say I still subscribe to the Washington Post because I like my news.
Well, let me tell you something. One of the worst things that happened in the Washington Post was Jeff Bezos deciding back in late October not to endorse Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Um, he killed the endorsement. Uh, Maybe 200,000, maybe 300,000 people canceled their subscriptions as a result. We haven't gotten real numbers on it. It may be the single most devastating act of, I don't know, editorial intervention, if that's what you want to call it,
Yeah.
ever. And it was very destructive to the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And,
But it
it
didn't destroy Jeff Bezos. It only destroyed those
God, no.
people who are gathering the news. That's
That's
so
right.
I
It all,
couldn't
it
take
all
it out on
falls
them.
it all falls on schlubs like us. Jeff
Yeah.
Bezos is going to have $160 billion, whether the Post comes out tomorrow or it doesn't. And in fact, as he said, owning the Post has been, a mixed blessing. Overall, I try to convey this to people. Overall, he's been good for the Post because he's invested
Yes.
money in it, and the Post is better as a result. And the fact that the Post exists is because of Jeff Bezos, but it's not 100% perfect, and that was a complete, self-own, as they say.
Yeah, yeah. That's a nice way of putting it.
Hmm.
Well, listen, I enjoy you. I love this conversation. I could do this for a long time because
Me too.
it's such, to me, this is this. I grew up in an era where you had to, and you had to have some experience to go somewhere, and you paid homage to that, and you paid it forward. And today, it just seems to be not there.
One of the revelations of getting old or older, you can pick which word you want, is you you will recognize that the values that you grew up with and cherished are constantly being undermined, if not eliminated. So this is one of the things that, as I see, what I did for, I don't know how many decades. It's just not the world I came up with. And that's kind of the way the world works. The
Yeah.
world's always changing. I don't have to like it though. And
Well, I think you take the best of the new and the best of the old, and some of the
yeah,
best of the old is vetted factual information. And to me, nothing. I've been accused of being on one the best I ever felt about myself as a writer was writing a piece, an opinion piece once. I had someone say they wanted to write an opinion piece for me, and I said, You've got 2 years experience. I said, come to me after you've got like 15 or 20. Maybe I'll let you write an opinion piece. Right now, go cover the news. But I had written this editorial for, community newspapers that I was running, and I got one group of people. I got like 3 or 4 letters from people saying I was a POS Republican right wing
sure.
asshole, and then there were 3 or 4 letters saying I'm a left wing asshole. I go, man, I hit my mark. I got
Yeah.
everybody pissed off. I'm happy.
I've said this before, and it's still valid. Is like there are a lot of people who can sing, and they're pretty good at it. And I can't, but a lot of people can. There are a lot of people who can report and write. They're literate. They know how to do it. Both things, though, you're never going to be good at either of those things unless you practice and have experience and refinement. And, you're never an overnight sensation. It's always
No.
the product of some hard work. So, yeah, people can do this with a little training, with a little experience, and with a little, internal motivation as well.
Yeah, and little being the operative word these days, but I won't go there. Oh, hey. Well, listen, Paul. Thanks again. I appreciate your time. Love to have you back to continue the discussion if you're up for it.
Anytime. Really enjoyed it, Brian.
Hi, once again. Thanks for joining us for Reverse Shot. I'm your host, Brian Karam. We'll catch you next time.